For every amazing port of a great game that everybody loves, there are ports that don't quite cut the mustard or that were developed with a view to... You know, this one isn't actually, Yes, alright, I know we try really hard to stay positive and upbeat here on FilmJoy. It's almost as if it's part of the brand or something, but video game ports are a minefield. Some are good, some are bad, and some are so bad they don't even get released. But there's always an interesting story behind each port, even if that story ends up being malicious and unpleasant. So, much like the previous video, here are 5 fun facts about bad ports, because in all things, there must be balance. Thad, you're up. Stop. What are you doing? I'm none of the people on that list. That's a very different show. What are you... Are you acting out? Have I done something to upset you? Because this is the second time in a row now, and it's starting to get... It's getting ridiculous. One of the finest platform games of the 90s, and a game that exists solely because Nintendo wanted something to compete with Aladdin on the Sega Genesis, a fun fact in itself but not the focus of this segment. Donkey Kong Country has been ported to a couple of systems, most notably the Game Boy Advance, but people tend to forget that a few years prior to the GBA release, there was a version cranked out for its predecessor, the Game Boy Color. I've talked about this before in a previous episode, an episode that is, in fact, one of the most popular on the old channel. No, really, it's the 4th most watched video I produced during the show's original run, which is bonkers when you consider that the entire content of the episode breaks down like so. Donkey Kong Country was ported to the Game Boy Color. The minecart Carnage level in the Game Boy Color port is much, much harder than the original SNES version. I kill a man. Despite its popularity, it's probably one of the episodes I am least satisfied with. I felt I had nothing of value to say, but rather than try to find something valuable to add to the conversation, I instead injected a pointless narrative hinging upon unnecessary violence, the result of struggling to find something to say while still needing to crank out a video on schedule. You might think I'm speaking about YouTube gaming videos as a whole here, but I couldn't possibly comment. It's a shame too, because the technical reasons for why Minecart Carnage is harder to beat on the Game Boy Color are actually fascinating. For a start, in the Super Nintendo original, if you hit an obstacle or run into an oncoming cart while you have a backup monkey on your team, as soon as your original dude jumps out and the backup takes over, the cart automatically does a little hop. This is essential, especially in situations where you're hitting an obstacle near the end of a track. Without that hop, you'd simply fall in. That's exactly what happens with the Game Boy Color version. For whatever reason, Rare didn't include that little hop. It's most likely an oversight rather than a deliberate omission, but it drastically ups the difficulty level in this version of the game. And for those of you thinking about that hidden barrel near the beginning that lets you bypass half the level, yeah, they took it out of the Game Boy Color version. Bastards. The Amiga version of Mortal Kombat has a number of what I will politely call issues, ranging from graphical glitches that had to be fixed by its players via a less than legitimate means, to the fact that the entire game operates using a single button joystick, but it does have something of an interesting legacy. The port was handled by Probe Entertainment, who used the same game engine as the basis for the Amiga port of Mortal Kombat 2, which, you know, it makes sense, they're basically the same game. But portions of the game engine were also used for the Amiga port of Dinosaur Nor'em Up Primal Rage. This also makes a little sense if you think about it. The mechanics of both games aren't that far off from each other, and both games feature fatalities. What's interesting is that the two franchises originate from different companies. Mortal Kombat originated with Midway, while Primal Rage was an ATARI game, though ironically ATARI would go on to be absorbed into Midway about a year after the game's home release. Of course, only one of these games went on to become a cultural phenomenon, which is why in 2018 you can find people still online knocking each other about with dinosaurs. If only, eh, viewers? Okay, this is not typically something I would get to talk about on the show, so I'm pretty excited about this. In 2007, shortly after the release of the Simpsons movie, EA Games put out The Simpsons Game, a 3D platformer that aims to lampoon video games as a whole by making the titular family aware of the fact that they are in a video game. That's only marginally less bananas of an adaptation than Konami's scrolling beat-em-up from the 90s. Anybody who jumps into the Simpsons game expecting something akin to the golden age of the show is going to find themselves very disappointed indeed. In fact, the Simpsons game goes one further by demonstrating that it's not just the writing of the modern show that lets it down, but also the animation. A classic moment from the 90s is reanimated from scratch by the TV show's then current production team, and it does not hold up. I mean, which of these would you rather watch? I'm gonna guess, I'm just gonna throw this out, hazard a guess, it's the one on the left, which has charm and character, but I digress. A Simpsons game was also put out for the Nintendo DS, which is a more traditional 2D platformer that uses the same story and trappings as the home console versions. It also features those cutscenes, but instead of using the new animation, it uses pre-rendered 3D models. Interestingly, some of these cutscenes feature alternate dialogue from the versions in the home release, which might explain why they opted to go the pre-rendered route, or maybe they thought that the bad CG look would play better into the metatextual video game narrative. Who knows? And furthermore, who cares? This is a licensed game that came out 11 years ago. Nobody is even remotely interested in this. Why did you put this in the video, Ben? This is for you. This is just for me. It's for me. That's okay. That's all right. Yep, we're back at the well for another drink of sweet, sweet worm water. No, actually, that's gross. Let's scratch that. In my 5 fun facts about good ports video, I told you about the little bonus for players of the PS1 and Dreamcast versions of the game in the form of console-exclusive terrain styles. These ports were handled in-house by Team 17, but ports for Nintendo consoles like the N64 were handled by Infogrames, who also published the game in most territories after acquiring the game's previous publishers, Microprose. The third-party port work is pretty obvious if you look at the game. The interface and menus are completely different, it's clunky, and it's not especially user-friendly, but the core gameplay itself is not quite on par with the other versions of the game, but it was almost so much worse. Back in 1999, when the console ports were in development, Team 17 maintained a development blog on the official Worms Armageddon website that was surprisingly honest and forthright about the challenges the various development teams were facing. One entry, now lost to the mists of time, reported on issues the N64 team were having coding projectiles into the game, grenades, bazookas, you name it, which led to them jokingly talking about the possibility of cutting these weapons altogether, which, you know, was a joke. At least I assume it was a joke. I hope it was a joke, because the weapons list in Armageddon is like 80% projectiles. Yep, we're doing a Mortal Kombat double dip for this one. This series has always had a love-hate relationship with the PC. Previous PC ports of classic Mortal Kombat games required far too much effort and energy to get them working, and even more recent releases have been marred with issues like unnecessarily fixed screen resolutions and just bad netcode. But one of the worst examples of a PC Mortal Kombat game comes from the latest entry in the series, Mortal Kombat X. The PC port was originally handled by High Voltage Software, yes, that High Voltage, and was plagued with technical issues, poor optimization, and yes, broken netcode, par for the course for a PC Mortal Kombat game. Eventually, Warner Bros. Announced they were dropping support for the game entirely, and also announced that the planned second expansion for the game, Kombat Pack 2, would not be available on the PC version. This understandably left a lot of people very upset, flooding NetherRealm Studios with messages and tweets, all of which eventually led to series producer Ed Boon, seen here trying to hide 3 jawbreakers in his mouth at the same time, doing a quick informal Twitter poll to find out how much interest there'd be in a PC release for the second Kombat Pack. This not only led to the release of Kombat Pack 2 for the PC, but also to the PC port being handed over to an entirely separate company, Polish game developer Qlog, who fixed most of the issues with the original release and improved the netcode, making this the first and quite possibly only time that Twitter outrage about a video game has yielded positive results. It's even more shocking when you consider that the game was published by WB Games, who famously announced that they wouldn't be fixing any of the bugs in Batman Arkham Origins because the development team would be too busy working on DLC for the title. It's not often that a bad port gets a once-over, least of all because the studio listened to what the fans had to say. I do love a happy ending. Thank you so much for watching this episode. These last 2 episodes have been a lot of fun to put together and a lot less stressful than the Animal Crossing and Lemmings episodes that I have also been working on. The next episode, by the way, is going to be a video essay about Sony's Lemmings problem, not specifically related to any particular port, but it is port related, so hopefully something that you guys find some value in. I'm happy with it. I'm happy with what I've written. In the meantime, don't forget to like this video, share this video, subscribe to FilmJoy for more shows like PortsCenter and Movies with Mikey. I love you. Thank you for your support, and be safe and be kind to each other. It saves a lot of hassle in the long run.